So welcome from my side, and thank you very, very much for having me here today. This is the first time that I have a chance to speak in the telecom sector to such an audience. So thank you for that. One thing I've learned already is I need to change my photo. COVID has put a little bit of weight on me, so this is not accurate anymore. We're talking about a concept called decentralized organizational identity. We talked about organizational identity this morning already. But I'm here to tell you that it must be decentralized. If there would be a new giant, new big, monopolist sitting in the middle of everything, to provide identity to all firms in the world, this is not going to work. So it must be truly decentralized, and I'm going to explain a little bit later how that works and what role life can help playing in this game. Now, identity is conferred. And I've heard many people today confusing a little bit the term identity versus identifier. So when I want to prove my identity, I show my passport. But then in the aircraft, I have to type in my passport number, which is the identifier. So there's a difference between identity and identifier. And we're talking about the LEI as being an identifier today, a number. So coming back to that, identity is conferred by someone. This could be public bodies, like you see here the passport from America, the SingPass from Singapore, or the ID card from Germany, or a telephone number. In many countries of the world, telephone numbers are the only means of identification for doing businesses among each other. And why do we need this? We need this because this is a funny picture, actually. The robot should be now AI equipped. Do you know this example? The fridge orders milk, the drone picks it up and delivers it to you, and then the money gets drawn from the bank account, all of that completely automatically? That is the reality today in many industries in the supply chain world. And when you have this, we talk about intelligent devices, connectivity, and machine-readable data. And how do you bring this all together, and how to secure this is what we're talking about. But first, we need to think about what is actually identity. Identity, I showed you my passport, usually comes in a list of attributes: name, maybe address, eye color, fingerprint, biometrics, any. These kind of attributes describe who you are. But this is dependent on definitions. So for instance, the passport does not include my home address. Because when I travel abroad, they don't care where I live. My ID card in Germany contains my address, which is another problem, because if I move, my ID card won't change. So identity and identifiers are always tied to your use case. And that's the problem today, where you have all these different use cases sitting in silos, and now you want to bridge this because the connectivity kicks in, and you can't do that. You cannot bridge all these ecosystems, all these frameworks, all these trust systems. And why do we need this? Let me talk about fraud a little bit. You would not believe how much fraud is out there in the B2B space. E-invoicing fraud and others, right? In all kinds of affairs. There's an estimation of 45 billion damage of fraud in 2025 in the B2B sector alone, and this is mind-blowing. Why do we not talk about this more? Because it's a matter of shame. If you got into a situation where a fraudster tricked you, you not want to talk about this, right? You don't put this up in public, but we should. We should be open about this, because we're all vulnerable in one way or the other to fraud, email phishing, scams, whatever, And that is why we need an identification scheme, and we need an identifier. And here are some of the criteria that forms a very good identifier for businesses. Not for person. I'm now going to leave the space of natural persons, and I'm entering into the business world. It must be an international standard, otherwise it won't work on a global scale. It must be unique and ambiguous, I must add, over time. So you get the ID, and it's the same ID forever. It's never going to be reused, never used anywhere else, and it's completely unique. And we have no embedded intelligence. I know very, very many identifiers where there is, in the string of the identifier, semantics that makes it easier to process the identifier in a transaction. But that's bad, because if the underlying semantics change, the identifier must change, and that's not good. That's why no embedded intelligence is a must-have. Take, for instance, you all know the BIC code, the banking identifier code for payment messages. They will find embedded intelligence, branch offices, trading desks, and everything else, and that can change. Freely accessible, absolutely. It must be a broad public good, for everyone accessible without any IP, any copyrights, or any other barrier for usage. And it must be decentralized way, because there is no one organization that could manage this. And by the way, nobody wants this, ourselves neither. So let's talk about the LEI system. That's the identifier that was created in the aftermath of the financial crisis, when people figured that some kind of a global business registration makes sense in order to know your customers and know your suppliers. The system is broken up in 3 tiers. On one hand, you have the G20 states, nation leaders who endorsed the system, and they created a regulatory oversight committee with about 70 regulators from all around the world, from America, China, UK, the Bank of England is in there, for instance, and others. And they are the guardians of the policies around the identifier. They make sure that everyone has to adhere to the open standards that are published and available to everybody else. And then down there you have the registrars. These are the companies who actually deal with you and do the vetting and validation and assign the LEIs to you. So you have policies on top, you have the assignment below. It is very clear you need someone who organizes and orchestrates the standards that are used in this network. And that's where we come in as Glyph. We're a standards body, if you like. And I would like to give you an analogy. In the telecom space, you have lots of operators and carriers, and they all compete with each other, on price, service, everything. But then they also agreed to use common standards for interoperability, because without standards, I couldn't phone someone from Vodafone to British Telecom, and vice versa, or send an SMS. And these standards are usually set by standard bodies like ITU and others. And that's pretty much the model that was used here to say, you have lots of people doing the work and compete with each other, very decentralized. You have a global oversight to make sure that the policy decisions are upheld, and then you need someone in the middle for setting the standards and check for compliance, and that's what Glyph does. We do not issue any identifier or not in any form or shape involved in the operation. Now, Glyph is a not-for-profit. We have absolutely no commercial interest in this. So my salary is not tied to any LEIs, if you know what I mean. We're a Swiss foundation. Switzerland was chosen to be neutral, not to be, it was supposed to not, look like it was dependent on US or Asia or whatever. Switzerland was chosen to be the neutral space. That's why the foundation is domiciled in Switzerland, but we have people all around the world working for us. It's a private-public partnership, so you have the regulatory oversight committee with all the public bodies. And then in our board, we have individuals coming from the private sector. We have individuals from British Telecom, for instance. Someone is just starting, I think, 1st of June at British Telecom. We have people from banks. We have people from supply chain, from other industries, Levi Strauss, jeans manufacturer, and things like that. So these are private, independent directors who help us to implement this private-public partnership. And today, we have 2.3 million LEIs being issued. That roughly is 90% of market capitalization globally, so that means the big guys are all covered. Next step is to go into the SME space. And this is the LEI. It's a little bit hard to read, so let me show you. On top, there's Nestle. Below the Nestle, there's a long string. That's the LEI number, 20-digit alphanumeric string. It's an ISO standard. And that links to what we call reference data, the name of the company, where it's legally domiciled in Switzerland, the registration number in the Swiss business registry. So we always provide the backlink to the legal truth in the business register or other registers, tax registers and so on. But Nestle is also a very nice example. Everybody knows Nestle, right? They have, I don't know, hundreds of subsidiaries. They all have some kind of Nestle string in their name. How do you know precisely who you're doing business with? Let's look at this. Nestle accent E, Nestle without accent, Nestle S.A. Nestle SA, Nestle Société Anonyme, Nestle Aktiengesellschaft, Nestle A.AG, Nestle AG. I could go on because they're operating 4 languages. You have over 20 permutations of names that are all correct. Now try to do this in string matching. Try now to find out whom you're doing business with. Oh, we need AI for string matching. No, you need unambiguous, unique identification, period. And that is what we have here. And you see left and right, you see the subsidiaries of Nestle. So we have the who is who information, very basic information. We call it business card information. And then we have the who owns whom information. These are the companies that Nestle consolidates in their financial statements. Now, talking about organizational identity and identifiers is one thing, but how many times do you use your passport? Personally, I use it only when I travel. So, at the airport, airline, customs, and hotel. Nowhere else. My personal ID card, my German ID card, I never use. I don't know why. I have it in my pocket, I never use it, right? But what I always use is my organizational identity. I'm the CEO of Glyph. Every day I sign contracts, I send messages, I wire money or authorize other people to wire money and so on and so forth. So organizational identity and organizational credentials, as we call them, are there for me every day from the morning to the night. By the way, my telephone number as well, which is why we want to bring this together. How do you authenticate yourself? Well, with your Apple ID, which is linked to your device and your telephone number, these kind of things, you know, we use every day. We have the Apple ID, we have the Amazon ID, we have the Google ID, we have all. Have you noticed, wherever you go shopping, you have a different customer number. And from some carriers, I have even multiple because they can't put the acts together and identify me uniquely. Is that really wise to have such a diverse system of identifiers? Because the burden is on all of us to match and map and operate and manually check and false positives, false negatives, and everything that we see in the daily life. 10% of all banking staff is doing nothing else but manual background checks. Can you imagine? Not sure about telecoms, but I would assume that there is a lot of manual work still in there, especially in business, because I like the panel when they said it's much more complicated for business than for individuals. That is really the case. So, coming back to this, the real world is very simple. Organization, Glyph, person, Stefan Wolf, role, CEO. We used to do that for hundreds of years, so organizational identity is not new. You know, power of attorney, you know, delegation of authority, all of this is in our legal systems for hundreds of years. Now we want to translate this into digital. And that's where we need a digital representation, which is nothing else but a container, as we call it, where you put in those 3 data elements, the LEI, Stefan Wolf is a name, or maybe in the future my digital fingerprint or my passport number, whatever, and the role. Now, role is not defined. So we have been working with ISO to create a standard for roles. And Glyph is maintaining that standard. So now we can precisely say in which country, which official role can be assigned by law. And funny enough, CEO, I'm the CEO of Glyph, is not an official Swiss role. I am CEO because our statutes, governance documents, inauguration documents claim that Glyph has to have a CEO. So all of this vetting that I'm CEO must be done by someone. And the vetting organization who does this is what we call the VLEI issuer. And they look into all these things. They look whether the LEI is real, belongs to you, whether you are a real person, whether your role is real, and everything else. And then they can assign a credential that you can use in your day-to-day transaction. Identity is only used once. That's when you onboard a client or onboard a customer. You establish a relationship, and you need to know at that point in time whom you're doing business with. So all the background checks, KYC, due diligence, takes place at the beginning. But once you have an established relationship with a business, you want to transact every day. And for those transactions, you need those credentials to make them secure, and you make them authentic. And you will hear lots more about this. How does this work? I said it's a decentralized system, and we're very proud of the fact that we have managed this also technically as a decentralized system. I know that many people, love platforms because it's so easy and convenient to program against platforms. But hey, do you really imagine one gigantic platform in the world that holds all the identity of everybody? I don't think so. The same for blockchain. Blockchain is nothing else but a distributed ledger. Don't confuse this with decentralized ledger. Blockchain is completely central. It is, published over many computer nodes, but it's always the same ledger. And you always have one company organizing this, one governance framework for that, and so on and so forth. So what we're trying to do here is a decentralized system. So Glyph, as the root of trust, we can name qualified VLEI issuers. And they go through a rigid audit program where we test whether they're fit for purpose. And once they have convinced us, we assign a credential to them that they can then use to issue credentials to organizations and people representing organizations. And they all compete with each other. They are completely independent in what they're doing. And there's no central data pool where all the data comes in. It all remains with the registrars. But it goes even further. The registrars can then assign those credentials to organizations, and they also can now start to issue credentials themselves. And those credentials are usually completely private. They will remain in their own space. They will remain in their own wallet, as we call it today, and will never hit the rest of the world. And this level of decentralization is unrivaled today. If you think of discussions around digital schemes like EIDAS, where you always need a trust service provider to issue credentials, and you can't do it yourself. This is what we're doing here. And what do corporates do with it? Well, they issue credentials to their employees to sign on to computer systems, to open a door, to sign a contract, to file a financial statement, to send a message. They can assign credentials also to their partners, to their suppliers, to their members. Hospitals can assign them to patients on a temporary basis. So the sky is the limit here. Because it's so decentral, it is within the ability of the corporate to decide what they want to do with it and how they want to do with this. The only thing that we're making sure is, as we have no platform, we need a common protocol, a standard that is a standard, how people can peer-to-peer interact with each other. Very simple thing. Compare this with TCP/IP on the internet. It's an open protocol. Everybody uses TCP/IP. Nobody owns it. Everyone can do whatever they want with it. And here we have the same idea. We have a protocol layer for identity that nobody controls, that nobody owns, other than the participants in the network. Use cases and benefits. Actually, this list I've taken from a paper that Timothy Ruff and I've just released. It's amazing. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. Every day we learn from people what they want to do with it. It's amazing. We don't have a sales team. As I said, we're not commercial. We're not selling this. I mean, I'm here to advertise this today, but that's all what we can do, really. But what happens is that now, from all around the world, people come to us and they say, hey, we have the following problem. Can we solve this way or the other way? And so on. And this is really amazing. And that is where we also want to invite all of you to participate in this model. We have the first QVI qualified last year, Provenant, and Randy, you heard him talking about this morning. Very entrepreneurial startup. But we have many, many others in the pipeline, from China to the United States, to Africa, to Europe. We're developing together with them their ability to launch and issue verifiable credentials as we speak. So by the end of this year, I would not be surprised if you would find 15, 20 more. And what do you do with it technically? This is my last slide, is you can now use this identity and identifying scheme and your authentication scheme, the crypto that is assigned with it. You can now use this on every application, every platform you want to deal with. You can anchor it on blockchain. Here are two, Hyperledger and Ethereum, fierce enemies, two different camps. Or you have APIs, you have cloud services, you have offline services, right? You sign a document offline. All of these applications can be done now with one identification scheme and one authentication scheme that is available to everyone. And by the way, the usage of all of this, LEI, VLEI, is completely free. There is no fee associated with that whatsoever. Everybody can use it for whatever purpose, and people do that. I can assure you. And with this, I'm at the end of my presentation.
So once you take a seat, do not come back up.